He walked into the Fairmont Olympic Hotel expecting to close business deals, not reopen old wounds. Henry Mitchell is a high-powered tech CEO with an empire built on precision, silence, and control. But nothing prepares him for the moment he spots a woman from his past, Emma Carter, standing in the lobby, holding the hand of a 5-year-old girl with his exact eyes. He tells himself it's coincidence, until she turns and the little girl smiles, a mirror of someone he once loved and maybe someone he left behind. Who is this child? Why didn't he know about her? And more importantly, who made sure he never did? As Henry's carefully controlled world begins to unravel, he's faced with questions money can't answer, a daughter he never met, a mother who tried to reach him, and a secret buried not by fate, but by betrayal. Now, Henry has a choice: return to the empire that defines him, or fight for the family he never knew he had. But redemption comes at a cost, and someone from his past is still pulling strings, determined to destroy what little he's just begun to rebuild. Can love rewrite a legacy built on absence? Stick around as we uncover a story of truth, transformation, and second chances. And if you believe that some mistakes deserve redemption, subscribe now, because this story is just the beginning. The revolving doors of the Fairmont Olympic spun open with a faint whoosh, ushering Henry Mitchell into a lobby alive with polished marble, curated music, and the quiet confidence of power. He adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal-gray Tom Ford suit and nodded courteously to a few familiar executives, their conversations swirling with talk of funding rounds and strategic buyouts. The annual Pacific Northwest Leadership Summit had just begun, and Henry, founder of Avancis Technologies, Seattle's crown jewel in predictive AI, was expected to be the highlight speaker. He should have felt triumphant. His recent merger with a European robotics firm had made headlines in Forbes and Bloomberg. At 50, Henry had built a kingdom of steel and code, his life punctuated by private jets, quarterly earnings, and pristine isolation. But somewhere between the echo of his Italian leather shoes on the marble and the sight of perfectly arranged orchids near the concierge, something shifted. She was standing by the far column, partially obscured by a vendor booth. Her hair, chestnut, loose exactly as he remembered, was bent slightly as she spoke to someone below her line of sight. Her laugh, light but cautious, trailed just enough to pull his attention fully. Henry's breath caught. His pulse staggered. Emma. He hadn't seen her in almost 6 years. Not since she'd left without a goodbye. Just a scrawled note on the kitchen island and a suitcase-shaped void beside the front door. Time had altered her delicately. More composed, maybe, but still ethereal in a way that never stopped haunting him. And then she looked up. For a moment, everything in the room dissolved. The marble, the suits, the whispered deals, all that existed was the ice-blue gaze of the little girl holding Emma's hand. The child couldn't have been more than 5. Her hair, the same earthy brown as Emma's, curled softly at the ends. But her eyes, they were his, exactly his, that piercing, stormy blue that his mother once called the color of trouble. A color that never skipped a generation in the Mitchell bloodline. The child looked up at him with innocent curiosity, her fingers curled gently into Emma's palm. Emma's posture changed immediately. Her body tensed, shoulders lifting defensively as if preparing for emotional impact, and then her lips parted, barely moving. "Henry," she breathed, almost apologetically. He took a tentative step forward, his voice faltering as his brain scrambled for footing. "Emma, he started, then turned to the child, eyes welling with a sudden rush of confusion and aching possibility. "Is she—" Emma exhaled shakily, her gaze dipping down to the little girl before returning to his. Yes, she said softly, her voice thick with unspoken grief. But it's not that simple. You were gone. Gone. The word landed like a blade. His mind was already reaching backward, desperate for timestamps, for math. He remembered the last time they were together in that way. Remembered the cold morning after, the silence that settled between them like fog. He thought she'd left because she was tired of waiting for him to be more than a name on a corporate directory. He never thought, never imagined. I didn't know, Henry whispered, dazed, as he crouched to the girl's level. What's her name? Sophie, Emma answered. She likes muffins. Sophie blinked at him, unsure. There was something deeply familiar about the way she tilted her head when confused, something Henry did often in interviews when he wasn't sure if a question was a trap. A flicker of hope stirred in him, painful and cautious. Hi, Sophie, he said gently. I'm Henry. She offered a small, polite nod. Are you Mama's friend? Henry's heart cracked right down the middle. Emma kneeled beside her, smoothing a hand over her daughter's coat. He used to be. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, thick with what-ifs and regrets that couldn't be retracted. Henry stood slowly, unable to take his eyes off Sophie. She smiled faintly, then tugged at her mother's hand. Can we go get muffins now? Emma looked at him. We have to go. She gets tired around this time. Wait, he said, his voice fragile with urgency. Can I see her again? Emma hesitated. Her eyes glistened with hesitation, pain, and something softer, something that hadn't completely died in her. If she wants, she said quietly. We're having breakfast at Storyville tomorrow, 8 o'clock. She turned, walking away without another word, Sophie skipping beside her. Henry stood motionless in the middle of the Fairmont lobby, his past walking away in a navy coat with the buttons too big and a future skipping beside it with blueberry muffin dreams. He didn't know how to breathe, but he knew one thing with crushing certainty. He would be at Storyville, and he wouldn't be late. Henry barely slept. He'd spent most of the night pacing his penthouse, the lights of Seattle flickering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows like a city refusing to sleep until he did. But his thoughts were relentless. Sophie. Her name alone echoed through his skull, overlapping with the sound of her voice, soft, curious, and utterly innocent. Are you Mama's friend? That question had gutted him. By sunrise, Henry stood over his kitchen island with a mug of untouched coffee and a pain in his chest he couldn't name. The hours since seeing Emma and Sophie had stretched into a brutal reckoning. 10 years ago, he had loved Emma Carter with a fire that defied logic. But then came the silence, the sudden departure, and the years of avoidance cloaked in the fabric of ambition. He told himself she left, that she gave up, that maybe she never wanted kids either, but none of that explained Sophie. By the time the clock struck 7:30 a.m., Henry was already seated near the fogged windows of Storyville Coffee, a table for 3 reserved in the corner, far from curious glances. The barista, a redhead with a calming presence, smiled kindly as she placed 2 blueberry muffins and a steaming cup of herbal tea on the table. You nervous? She asked, clearly picking up on his twitching fingers. I'm not sure what I am, he replied truthfully. Then the bell above the cafe door jingled, and there they were. Emma entered with Sophie in tow, her scarf pulled snug around her neck and her cheeks flushed from the chill outside. Sophie wore a yellow coat with mismatched buttons and tiny boots that lit up when she walked. Her eyes locked onto Henry's, and for a second they both froze. That connection, unmistakable, magnetic, frightening. Emma approached the table slowly, pulling out a chair for Sophie and then sitting across from Henry, her jaw tight, her expression unreadable. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said, her voice guarded. I wasn't sure you'd let me. Henry replied, his voice low. Sophie climbed into her seat and eyed the muffin suspiciously. "No raisins?" she asked with adorable seriousness. Henry cracked the faintest smile. "Only blueberries. Raisins don't belong in muffins." Satisfied, she nodded and took a bite. Emma watched the exchange, something soft flickering behind her eyes, then hardening again. "You want to ask me things. Go ahead." Henry hesitated, unsure how to even begin. "When did you find out you were pregnant?" he asked carefully. 6 weeks after I left." The answer hit like a blow to the chest. "I would have come back," Henry said, eyes glistening with regret. "You had to know that." Emma shook her head slowly. "I tried to tell you, Henry. I left voicemails, sent emails. I even came to your office once." Henry stared at her, stunned. "That never reached me. I never got anything." "Because you weren't supposed to," she said bitterly. "Your assistant, Claudia, she intercepted everything. She told me I was just an old flame and baggage you didn't want." Henry's stomach dropped. Claudia Hale, his assistant at the time. Efficient, loyal, but ruthlessly protective of his image, of his schedule, of him. "I never told her that. I never said any of that." "You didn't have to," Emma said softly. "She made it clear I wasn't welcome. And I was scared, Henry. I had no money, no safety net, and a pregnancy no one believed could be real." Henry lowered his gaze, his voice a whisper. "Because I told you I couldn't have kids." Emma nodded slowly. "And you believed that over me. You believed it so quickly, so easily, it broke something in me. I wasn't going to beg you to believe in your own child." Across the table, Sophie munched her muffin and glanced between them, sensing the weight but not understanding it. Henry reached for his coffee with a trembling hand. "If I had known, if I'd gotten those messages." "But you didn't," Emma interrupted gently. "And what matters now isn't what was lost. It's what's left." Henry looked at Sophie, so bright, so curious, and swallowed the lump in his throat. "Can I see her again, after today?" Emma didn't answer immediately. She reached across the table and brushed a crumb from Sophie's cheek, her eyes lingering on her daughter with maternal gravity. "If she wants," she said. "This isn't about you and me. It's about whether she wants you in her life, and whether you'll show up this time." Henry nodded, more solemnly than he ever had in a boardroom. "I will," he whispered. The weight of 10 years lingered in the silence that followed, but between blueberry crumbs and tentative glances, a door had opened. And Henry Mitchell, for the first time in a decade, knew which one he needed to walk through. The following Saturday, Henry stood outside Storyville Coffee 15 minutes early, holding a paper bag with a muffin, no raisins, and a small cup of hot chocolate. Extra whipped cream, just as Sophie liked it. He was nervous, not the kind of nervous he felt before a product launch or quarterly investor call. This was something deeper, more personal. He ran a hand through his neatly combed hair and checked his watch for the 5th time. Then she appeared. Emma's walk was familiar, strong and cautious. Beside her, Sophie skipped, wearing a navy blue hoodie with a unicorn stitched onto the chest, a purple backpack bouncing behind her. When they reached him, Henry crouched to her level and gently offered the cup. "For the bravest 5-year-old I've ever met." Sophie smiled, taking it without hesitation. "Does it have whipped cream?" "Lots." "Okay, you can sit with us." Emma arched an eyebrow but said nothing. They walked toward the Seattle Center, the sky a blanket of pale gray. As they passed the Museum of Pop Culture, Henry noticed how Sophie stopped to press her face against the glass of the children's science exhibit. "You like robots?" he asked. She nodded eagerly. "And dinosaurs, but not the ones with feathers. That's cheating." Henry chuckled. "I completely agree." At the playground, she kicked off her shoes and raced to the swings. Henry followed slowly, his eyes locked on her as she soared into the air, giggling between squeals. Emma sat on the bench beside him, watching quietly. "She looks like you," Henry murmured. Emma glanced over. "She acts like you. Stubborn as a mule." He grinned faintly. "I can't argue with that." They sat in silence, the sound of children playing rising around them like a song of redemption. A few moments later, Sophie returned, cheeks flushed and hair a mess, and plopped herself between them on the bench. "Do you have sidewalk chalk?" she asked out of nowhere. Henry blinked. "Sidewalk what?" Emma smirked. "It's her newest obsession. I want to draw a rainbow with a castle and a cat," Sophie added seriously, "and a dinosaur." Henry smiled and stood. "Let's go get some chalk." The nearby gift shop sold overpriced neon-colored packs, and Henry didn't hesitate, handing Sophie the bag like it was treasure. Her eyes lit up. "Thanks, Hen." The nickname startled him. "Hen?" Sophie shrugged. "Your name's too long." He laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "Hen it is." Back at the sidewalk near the fountain, Sophie got to work, tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth as she sketched bold arcs of color across the gray concrete. Henry knelt beside her, his $1,000 slacks smudged with pink and green chalk. Emma watched from a short distance. Her guard still up, but something in her posture had softened. She hadn't seen Henry laugh like this in years, maybe not ever. As Sophie finished her masterpiece, a towering rainbow over a castle guarded by a purple stegosaurus, she leaned her head on Henry's shoulder. "My tummy hurts when I get nervous," she said quietly. Henry looked down. "Are you nervous now?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." Something about the way she said it undid him. He looked up to find Emma standing nearby. Their eyes met, hers cautious, his filled with a sincerity that had no place in a corporate boardroom. "I missed a lot," he said. "Yes," she replied, "but..." "She doesn't need a perfect dad. She just needs one who stays." "I'm not going anywhere," Henry said, his voice thick. Emma nodded slowly. "Then maybe you two can meet again next weekend." He smiled at Sophie. "Same time, same muffins?" Sophie nodded with a grin. "But this time, add sprinkles." As the sun dipped behind the clouds and the first drops of Seattle drizzle painted the sidewalk, Henry felt something shift inside him, a quiet unraveling of the life he had built on ambition alone. He had discovered a different kind of success, and her name was Sophie. Henry hadn't planned on returning the following weekend. He needed to. The moment Emma said, "Maybe you two can meet again," it had taken root in him like something sacred. His calendar, once a fortress of back-to-back obligations, now had a recurring Saturday block labeled simply Sophie. No titles, no pretense, just her. The next weekend, they met outside the Seattle Center again. Sophie ran toward him with a chalk-stained hoodie, cheeks pink with excitement. "You came!" "Of course I did," Henry replied warmly, bending down to catch her in a brief, startled hug. She smelled like strawberries and sidewalk dust. "I brought more chalk," she beamed, holding up a fresh pack. "We're drawing superheroes today." "Oh?" Henry teased. "Who's the hero?" "Me, obviously," she said with mock seriousness, "but you can be my sidekick." Emma approached with coffee for them both, his black, hers with almond milk and honey. Her eyes studied him for a beat before she said softly, "She didn't stop talking about last week. Drew you 3 times." He felt something tug at his chest. "I've never had my portrait drawn. I must have looked important." Emma half smiled. "She made you fly." As Sophie got to work drawing capes and lightning bolts, Henry sat beside her. "Why flying?" he asked curiously. She shrugged. "Because you came back. Only superheroes come back." Henry blinked, stunned by the honesty wrapped in innocence. It took everything in him not to cry right there on the pavement. By the third weekend, it wasn't just meetups. Henry began clearing entire afternoons. He brought books to read together in the Seattle Public Library's children's wing, pushed Sophie on the swing with a steady hand, and learned which ice cream trucks to avoid, the rude ones, and which ones gave out sprinkles for free. At first, Emma was quiet in the background, watchful, weary, but slowly she began to relax. Her laughter came easier. Her walls, built from years of exhaustion and single-mother survival, began to show tiny cracks where light could filter through. One cloudy afternoon, as Sophie painted her tiny hands with watercolors, Henry caught Emma watching him from across the table. "I didn't expect this," she admitted gently. "Not the muffins, not the Saturdays, not you." "I didn't expect me either," he replied. "I used to dream of you showing up," Emma confessed, voice trembling slightly. "But after a while, I stopped believing. I thought, if you cared, you'd be here." Henry's jaw tightened with regret. "I should have been." Emma nodded slowly, eyes glancing toward Sophie, who now sat cross-legged drawing clouds with neon markers. "It's not about what you missed," she said. "It's about what you do now." Henry inhaled deeply. "Then I'm staying." Later that evening, as Sophie tucked her artwork into her backpack, every drawing featuring her, a rainbow, and a stick figure labeled Hen, she reached for his hand instinctively. "You can come back next weekend," she said, "but only if you bring snacks." "I think I can manage that," he smiled, squeezing her small hand gently. As they walked to the car, Emma glanced at Henry. "She calls you Hen now, like it's the most natural thing in the world." "I kinda like it," he said. "Yeah, so does she." They stood at the car, neither wanting to be the first to say goodbye. "I know I can't erase the past," Henry began quietly, "but I can show up every day from here forward. For her, for you." Emma met his gaze, her eyes tired but open. "Just don't make promises you won't keep. She doesn't need another goodbye." "I'm not going anywhere," he said again. This time, she believed him. And as the car drove away, with Sophie waving from the back seat, Henry stood beneath the Seattle drizzle with a bag of leftover chalk in his pocket and something unfamiliar swelling in his chest. Hope. 3 weeks had passed since Henry Mitchell first sat across from Sophie at Storyville Coffee with a blueberry muffin and a cautious heart. Now, that coffee shop felt like a second home. Same booth, same order. Black coffee, almond milk latte, one muffin with no raisins, one chocolate chip scone for emergencies, and a quiet miracle happening across the table. Sophie had a ritual now. She'd unwrap her muffin slowly, press her palms against the warm pastry and say, "Okay, so what did you do this week, Hen?" And Henry would tell her everything. Not about meetings or mergers, but about trying to make pancakes without burning them, reading a chapter from her favorite book out loud even though no one else was there, and searching for sidewalk chalk colors that didn't exist. She'd giggle, eyes lighting up in a way that warmed him more than the coffee ever could. Emma sat nearby, close enough to listen, far enough to let them bond without interference. Every week, her gaze softened a little more. Every week, she said fewer words like maybe and we'll see, and more like yes and that would be nice. By the 5th Saturday, Henry had canceled 2 board meetings, rescheduled 3 media interviews, and politely declined a keynote speaking gig in San Francisco. He didn't care. What mattered was Sophie, her questions, her trust, her slow transformation from wide-eyed curiosity to genuine affection. Until everything unraveled. They were walking through Seattle Center, headed toward the sculpture park, when Emma's phone buzzed. She pulled it from her coat pocket, her brows instantly furrowing. "Emma?" Henry asked, seeing her expression shift. She said nothing, just held out her phone. A tabloid website glared from the screen. CEO's secret daughter revealed. Meet the muffin girl he couldn't deny. Below the headline, a grainy photo. Henry, seated with Sophie in the cafe, handing her the muffin with a tentative smile. Emma, beside them, blurred but identifiable. Henry's stomach dropped. What? How? Who would? But he already knew Claudia Hale, his old executive assistant. The same woman Emma had accused of blocking her calls years ago. She now worked for a rival firm notorious for aggressive PR stunts. It all made sickening sense. Emma turned away from Sophie, her voice a low whisper. This is why I never wanted this. Why I kept her out of the spotlight. She's not a scandal. She's not, Henry agreed fiercely, his voice trembling with restrained rage. And neither are you. Sophie looked up, sensing the tension. Why is Mommy mad? Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart, Emma said quickly, crouching beside her. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people just don't know how to mind their own business. Henry paced a few feet away, phone pressed to his ear. James, it's me. Schedule a press conference. Today. I'm not letting this narrative spin out of control. His lawyer, his comms director, even his board chair pushed back. Wait it out, deny, rebrand. But Henry was done hiding, done running. That evening, under the harsh lights of a press room filled with cameras, Henry took the podium. I'm not here to deny anything, he said, voice steady but passionate. That little girl in the photo, her name is Sophie. She's 5 years old. She loves blueberry muffins, sidewalk chalk, and asking brilliant questions. And she is my daughter. Murmurs exploded across the room. I didn't know about her until recently, Henry continued. But now that I do, I will protect her with everything I have. And I will not allow anyone, no media outlet, no rival executive, no bitter former employee, to reduce her existence to gossip. The next morning, Claudia Hale was fired from her firm. Henry didn't smile when he heard the news, but he exhaled, finally, knowing he'd taken a stand for the right reasons. Later that day, at Emma's apartment, he knocked gently. Emma answered, eyes rimmed with fatigue and wariness. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Henry said, stepping inside as Sophie ran to greet him. I did. And when Sophie hugged him tight around the waist and Emma met his gaze with silent gratitude, Henry felt something shift. Something real. Something earned. This wasn't damage control. This was family. It was just past midnight when the call came, panicked, breathless, and trembling. Henry, I don't know what to do. Emma's voice cracked through the phone, the sharp edge of fear unmistakable. It's Sophie. She's burning up. Henry was already halfway out of bed before she finished. I'm on my way. Which hospital? Seattle Children's. We're in the ER lobby. He didn't ask for more details. He didn't pack a bag. He threw on yesterday's jeans, grabbed his coat, and bolted from his penthouse with the kind of urgency that made the doorman flinch as he flew past. This wasn't about protocol. This was his child. By the time Henry pushed through the hospital's revolving doors, the sterile white glow of fluorescent lighting blurred against his racing heart. He scanned the waiting area until he saw them. Emma pacing in tight circles, her eyes wild with worry, and Sophie slumped in a nurse's arms, cheeks flushed and body limp. Emma rushed to him the second she saw his face. She started shaking. I thought it was just a cold. Then she couldn't stop crying. She said her head hurt and I didn't know what else to do. Henry placed both hands gently on her shoulders, steadying her. You did exactly the right thing. I've got her now. We've got her. They followed the nurse down a long hallway that felt like miles, Sophie clinging to consciousness. Henry knelt beside the hospital bed as the nurse lowered her into it, brushing a damp strand of hair from her burning forehead. "Hey, Muffin," he whispered, his voice breaking as he cupped her tiny hand. "I'm here." Sophie blinked at him through a haze of fever. "Hen?" she murmured weakly. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. Emma stood across the room, arms folded tightly across her chest. She wasn't used to this, leaning on anyone, not even Henry, but something about the way he held Sophie, the way he murmured to her with reverence instead of panic, chipped away at walls she didn't realize were still standing. The doctor arrived soon after, a young woman with a calming voice and sure hands. "Her fever's at 103.6. It looks like influenza, but we'll run labs to rule out complications. The good news is she's responsive, which is reassuring." As medical staff moved around them, Henry didn't budge. He sat at Sophie's bedside, holding her hand like a prayer. At one point she whimpered, and he gently hummed the off-key tune she'd once called the Blueberry Muffin Song. Emma watched, eyes glistening. "I don't think I've ever seen you this still," she said softly, sitting beside him. Henry didn't turn. "I've never felt this helpless." "You're not," she said, her voice quieter than before. "You're here. That's what matters." Hours passed in slow motion. Sophie drifted in and out of sleep, her hand never leaving his. Around 4 a.m., the fever finally began to break. Her breaths grew steadier, her coloring less alarming. Emma had dozed off in the chair beside them, her head tilted against the wall. Henry stayed awake, brushing his thumb gently across Sophie's palm. When the doctor returned just before sunrise, she offered a reassuring smile. "She'll be okay. A rough few days ahead, but she's past the worst of it." Henry nodded gratefully. After the nurse adjusted Sophie's blanket and dimmed the lights, he looked across the bed at Emma. She stirred. "Hey," he said gently. She blinked, her voice husky with exhaustion. "Is she?" "She's resting. Her fever's down." Emma sat up, brushing hair from her face. She looked at Henry, really looked at him, and something softened in her chest. "You stayed," she whispered. "Of course I did." Her gaze dropped to Sophie's sleeping form, then back to him. "You're not the same man I left." Henry swallowed hard. "I'm trying not to be." Emma nodded slowly. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was healing. In that small hospital room, something long broken started mending. No promises, no sweeping declarations. Just presence. Just choice. As dawn crept through the blinds, Henry finally allowed himself a deep breath. Not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time in a long time, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The following Sunday, just before noon, the sky over Seattle softened with a rare break in the clouds, casting a gentle silver light across the city. The streets glistened from an earlier drizzle, and the air smelled of wet earth and blooming cherry blossoms. At the Seattle Center playground, the usual buzz of children's laughter mixed with distant street musicians playing bluesy guitar near the fountain. Henry arrived early, a brown paper bag from Storyville Coffee in one hand and a bundle of sidewalk chalk in the other. He wasn't dressed like a CEO anymore. No polished leather shoes, no watch worth more than a car. Today, he wore jeans, a faded navy hoodie, and a baseball cap Sophie had once playfully pulled over his eyes. It was a new uniform for a new role. Emma and Sophie appeared at the park's edge just as Henry spread a blanket on the grass. Sophie ran ahead, arms open like wings, her purple jacket flapping as she launched herself toward him. "Hen!" she squealed. Henry caught her midair, spinning her gently before settling her on his hip. "Hey, Muffin, I brought your favorite." She narrowed her eyes. "With no raisins?" He grinned. "Swore an oath to the Muffin Council." Emma chuckled softly behind them. "You're learning." They settled into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. Emma took the coffee and sat beside the blanket while Sophie started pulling chalk from the box, immediately drawing a giant sun on the pavement. Henry sat beside her, watching the colors smudge her tiny fingers. "So, what are we making?" "A story," Sophie said decisively. "This is the sun, and here's our house. You live here now, too." He blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, I do?" Sophie didn't look up. "Only if you draw your room right. Everyone gets their own room in chalk houses." Henry grabbed a blue piece of chalk and started sketching a lopsided square. "I've never drawn a room before." "Then you'll learn," she said matter-of-factly, "like how you learned the muffin rules." Emma watched from the side, her arms loosely wrapped around her knees, as the two sketched doorways, pets, clouds, and even a chalk car with a wobbly license plate reading S0F13. Between moments of play, Henry took breaks to simply watch his daughter, how she chewed on her bottom lip when she concentrated, how she glanced over her shoulder to make sure he was still there, still paying attention, and every time she looked, he smiled. Not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something rooted. After a while, Sophie pulled out a pair of colored pencils from her backpack and began to draw on a blank notepad. Henry peeked over. "What's this one?" She shrugged. "It's us. A little picture for your house, so you don't forget." He stared at the sketch. 4 stick figures. Emma, Sophie, himself, and a small dog. Sophie had added labels above each. Mommy, me, hen, and dog, maybe. His eyes welled, and he cleared his throat roughly. "I'll frame it." She beamed. "With glitter?" "Absolutely. Glitter mandatory." Nearby, Emma sipped her coffee, her eyes occasionally drifting to the man crouched beside their daughter. For weeks, she'd been bracing herself. For flakiness, for the inevitable letdown. But it hadn't come. Henry had cleared his schedule, shown up on time, listened to Sophie's endless tangents about worms and superhero names. He'd made pancakes badly and laughed when she called him out on burning them. He was trying, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. "You're good with her," Emma finally said, as Sophie raced off toward the swings. Henry glanced over, humbled. "She makes it easy." Emma's smile faded slightly. "It won't always be easy." "I know," he replied quietly, meeting her gaze. "But I'm not here for easy, I'm here for everything." A long pause. The wind whispered through the budding trees above. A father, a mother, a child, trying again, not to rewrite the past, but to shape something better from the present. "Want to push me?" Sophie called from the swings. Henry stood, brushing chalk dust from his hands. "Be right there, kiddo." As he jogged toward her, Emma watched him go. Her heart caught somewhere between old wounds and new beginnings. She didn't know what the future looked like yet, but she was beginning to believe it could be drawn, one crooked chalk line at a time. The spring afternoon waned gently into evening, the sun beginning its slow descent behind the Cascades, casting long amber shadows across the Seattle Center's sprawling lawn. The crowds had thinned, replaced by locals strolling hand in hand, children skipping in uneven rhythms, and parents coaxing reluctant kids from playgrounds. Henry lingered by the swings with Sophie, their laughter carrying into the open air. She had insisted on one last push, the biggest push ever, and he obliged, launching her skyward with exaggerated drama. "Hen, higher!" she squealed, her little legs pumping. He chuckled. "Hen? Since when did I lose the rye?" Sophie giggled mid-swing, her voice light and mischievous. "It's your superhero name, Hen the Brave. You save muffins and catch swing thieves." Henry pretended to gasp. "A swing thief? In my city?" Sophie nodded solemnly, then burst into peals of laughter. Emma, seated on a nearby bench with her coat pulled tight against the breeze, watched with cautious warmth. Something about the sound of her daughter laughing so freely, so fully, etched deep lines of gratitude across her heart. When Sophie finally slowed down, Henry caught the chains and gently brought her to a stop. She hopped off with a satisfied thud, immediately reaching for his hand. "Come see what I drew," she said excitedly, tugging him toward the chalk-covered sidewalk they had abandoned hours earlier. A new addition had been sketched on the ground, a small blue heart with 3 names inside: Mom, me, Hen. He stared at it, his voice catching. "You put me in the heart." "Duh," Sophie said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You stayed." Emma approached from behind, quietly moved. She only ever draws people inside the heart when she knows they're not going anywhere. Henry turned, meeting Emma's eyes, the truth behind her words settling into his chest with reverent weight. "I'm not." They lingered there for a moment, just the 3 of them, until Sophie, now thoroughly exhausted from the day's adventures, leaned against Emma's side. "I want to go home," she mumbled. Emma knelt and zipped her jacket. "Let's get you home, baby." Henry followed as they made their way down the path toward the car. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. He opened the door, helped buckle Sophie in, and waited while Emma rounded the car. Before climbing into the driver's seat, she turned toward him. "She likes you." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Yeah?" "She doesn't warm up easily. She's curious, sure, but trust? That's harder. Especially after everything." Henry nodded, understanding deeply. "I'm grateful she's giving me the chance, and I know it's not just her trust I need to earn." Emma's face softened, her guard slowly receding. "It's not about earning it in one grand gesture, Henry. It's about being consistent, about showing up when it matters." He nodded again, slower this time. "Then I'll keep showing up." "Good," she said gently, before slipping into the car and starting the engine. As the taillights faded into the dusk, Henry stood motionless on the sidewalk, the cool air brushing against his face. He had come so far from that first stunned moment in the hotel lobby, to now, watching the car that held the most important part of his life drive off, trusting that it would come back. Later that night, he sat in his apartment staring at the drawing Sophie had tucked into his coat pocket, a crayon portrait of 3 figures under a purple sky, standing in front of a small house. Above their heads, Sophie had scrawled in oversized letters, "My family." No disclaimers, no conditions, just my family. Henry pressed the drawing against his chest, his eyes misting unexpectedly. It wasn't about the years he had missed. It was about the days ahead, and maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to believe he could be the kind of man they both needed. It was just past 6:30 a.m. when Henry's phone lit up on his nightstand, vibrating violently against the oak surface. He groaned, reaching over and squinting at the screen. Dozens of notifications blinked in rapid sequence: emails, missed calls, text messages. Then he saw it. Breaking! Seattle Tech Titan's secret daughter revealed. Below it, a blurry photo of him crouched at Sophie's level, gently handing her a muffin outside Storyville Coffee. The caption beneath the image screamed, "Scandal or Secret Family. Emma Carter, ex-girlfriend of CEO Henry Mitchell, seen with child-bearing uncanny resemblance." Henry sat up, heart pounding, shame and fury flooding him simultaneously. His mind raced, but one name burned through the haze like acid: Claudia Hale. His former executive assistant, now aligned with a rival firm, had finally struck back. She must have seen them together, captured the moment, and sold the story to tabloids in a bitter attempt to drag his reputation and Emma's privacy through the mud. The phone buzzed again. His lawyer, Peter Goldstein. Henry answered. "I assume you've seen it," Peter said without preamble. "I have. It's all over social media. Morning talk shows are picking it up. This isn't just gossip, it's a narrative." Henry exhaled slowly, grounding himself. "And what's the firm's stance?" "They want a statement. You know how shareholders react to rumors, especially ones that imply reckless behavior." Henry rubbed his temples. "It's not reckless. It's my daughter." Peter hesitated. "So, You're confirming it? Yes, Henry said plainly, and I'm going to make that clear. Today. Just then, another call came in. Emma. He answered instantly. Her voice trembled. There are reporters outside our apartment, Henry. Sophie hasn't seen them yet, but what do we do? Henry stood up and crossed the room, already reaching for his shirt. Let me come to you. I'll handle this. No. Emma's voice firmed with protective urgency. You can't risk making this worse. I'll keep her inside today. But Henry... Her voice cracked. Please, please don't let them turn her into a headline. His heart twisted. I promise you, I won't. 2 hours later, the press conference was set. At a quiet atrium in downtown Seattle, Henry stood at a podium in front of a sea of cameras and reporters. His PR team had prepped statements, but he shoved them aside. He looked tired, but resolute, confident, yet heartbreakingly human. I'm Henry Mitchell, he began, voice steady but weighted with emotion, and I want to address the story that circulated over the last 24 hours. Yes, I have a daughter. Her name is Sophie. She's 5 years old, and she's the best part of my life. The room murmured. Flashbulbs clicked. I didn't know about her until recently. That's not Emma Carter's fault. It's mine. Mine for being too distracted, too absorbed, too blind to see the truth when it mattered most. He took a breath, eyes locked with the lenses. Emma is a remarkable mother. She raised Sophie on her own, with dignity and strength, while I built a company that, at the time, I thought was everything. But to happened? She's burning up, 102.3. I gave her children's Tylenol, but she's lethargic, and she's complaining her chest hurts when she breathes. I don't know if it's just a cold, or if it's something worse. I'm coming, right now. She didn't stop him. By the time Henry arrived at the ER entrance of Seattle Children's Hospital, he spotted Emma pacing near the glass doors, holding a pink hoodie in one hand, her other arm wrapped tightly around her midsection as if keeping herself from unraveling. Her eyes were red, not just from the rain. Sophie? He asked, rushing up. She's in triage. They took her straight back. I signed her in, but they asked for both parents. Henry nodded and followed her through the automatic doors, the sterile scent of antiseptic mixing with the low buzz of fluorescent lights and distant coughs. Inside the pediatric unit, Sophie lay curled on the hospital bed, impossibly small beneath the oversized blanket. Her cheeks were flushed, her tiny lips parted as she breathed shallowly. A nurse adjusted the IV and offered a kind smile. She's dehydrated and spiked a fever pretty fast. Could be viral, but we're running a chest X-ray and some blood work to rule out anything more serious. Emma sat by Sophie's side, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead, whispering softly, trying not to cry. Henry stood on the other side of the bed, at first hesitant, then slowly reaching out and gently touching Sophie's hand. Her fingers twitched, then curled around his. Hey, Muffin, he murmured, voice cracking. I'm here. She blinked weakly, managing a fragile smile. You came. Always, he whispered, leaning down and kissing her temple. I'm not going anywhere. Hours passed. The initial panic gave way to waiting, pacing, and the kind of silence only found in hospital rooms, where time slows and every beep, every footstep from the hallway, feels like it might bring either relief or devastation. Emma leaned her head against Henry's shoulder as they sat together beside Sophie's bed. It was the first time they'd touched like that in years. I used to dream about this moment, she said quietly. Not the hospital, but you. Sitting beside her, knowing her, loving her. He swallowed hard. I should have been here from the start. You didn't know, she said softly, then paused. But you do now. The doctor finally returned with the news that Sophie's chest X-ray showed mild pneumonia, but caught early. They'd start antibiotics, monitor her overnight, and she could likely go home the next day. Relief hit like a wave. Emma sighed, burying her face in her hands. Henry closed his eyes and let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Later that night, as Sophie drifted into sleep with a humidifier humming beside her and a stuffed penguin tucked beneath her arm, Emma stepped out into the hallway to take a call from her sister. Henry stayed behind, watching the slow rise and fall of his daughter's chest. He reached for his phone and quietly snapped a photo. Not to post, not to prove anything, just to remember this moment, this child, this new chapter. When Emma returned, Henry stood, gesturing toward the small couch in the corner. "You should rest. I'll sit with her." She hesitated, then nodded, curling up on the cushions. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For showing up tonight, for not asking questions, for just being here." Henry sat beside Sophie again, gently adjusting her blanket. He looked over his shoulder at Emma, already drifting off to sleep, and whispered more to himself than anyone else. "I'm not leaving again." And for the first time since they'd reconnected, he knew that promise wasn't made out of guilt or obligation. It was made out of love. A kind of love that had waited quietly for years, and finally found its voice in the stillness of a hospital room, in the rhythm of a child's breath. By the time spring crept into Seattle with its quiet mist and blooming dogwoods, Henry Mitchell had reoriented his life, though few outside his inner circle knew the depth of the change. He'd stopped measuring time by quarterly reports and press clippings. These days, it was Sophie's schedule that dictated his world. Dance recitals, Saturday pancakes, bedtime stories about dragons and rainbows and planets she believed had their own personalities. His once cluttered office now shared space with glitter-streaked drawings of princesses in lab coats and a framed crayon family portrait labeled Mom, Hen, Me. The name stuck. Hen, born from a slip of Sophie's tongue and now uttered with affection and habit. It was hers alone, a title not earned through biology, but through presence. Emma, cautiously at first, had opened up the space around them. She let him in slowly, intentionally. At first, it was little things, a lunch here, a shared school pickup there, but over time, that space became familiarity, became comfort, became something that resembled a life they might have built years ago if things had gone differently. One Friday afternoon, as rain pattered against the windows of their cozy apartment, Henry stood in the kitchen spreading peanut butter on Sophie's toast while humming along to her favorite song playing from the speaker. Emma leaned against the doorway, arms folded loosely, watching the scene with quiet reflection. "You know," she said, her voice warm, "the first time I imagined this, just you in our kitchen wearing that ridiculous apron. Sophie was barely 2. Henry glanced down at the faded apron. A Seattle Seahawks logo stretched awkwardly across his chest. He grinned. "Ridiculous? This thing's vintage. It's earned respect." She chuckled softly, the sound genuine. "You're good with her, Henry. Better than I expected." He looked over his shoulder. "Better than you expected, or better than you hoped?" Emma hesitated, then shrugged gently. "Both." Sophie darted into the room, wearing mismatched socks and holding a wrinkled flyer. "Hen! Mom! Miss Turner says we have to bring something that represents our family to the open house next week." She waved the paper with theatrical flair. "What do we bring?" Henry crouched to her level, pretending to consider it. What if we brought this toast, a symbol of how your mom and I are now a powerful co-parenting team, bonded by carbohydrates?" Emma rolled her eyes playfully, while Sophie giggled. "I was thinking something better," Sophie declared, "like a picture of us, or the quilt Mom's making." Emma blushed slightly. "It's not finished." "But it's still us," Sophie said with finality. "All the pieces that don't match but fit together." That sentence lingered in the air, quiet and true. That evening, as Sophie slept sprawled across her bed, one leg draped dramatically over the side like she was mid-ballet routine, even in dreams, Emma found herself sitting on the couch beside Henry again. They shared tea and silence, comfortable silence. "You've become something solid for her," she said after a while, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Reliable, steady. I wasn't sure she'd ever have that from you." Henry's voice was low. "I wasn't sure I'd ever be that." Emma tilted her head, studying him. What changed? He didn't answer right away. He looked down the hallway toward Sophie's room. "She did," he said simply. "That little girl with questions I couldn't answer, who forgave me anyway. She changed everything." Emma's expression softened. "And what about me?" Henry turned to her then, his eyes vulnerable in a way they rarely were in the boardrooms or interviews. "I want to earn your trust again," he said. "Not just as Sophie's dad, but as the man who should have listened, who should have stayed." Emma didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, brushing an invisible crumb from the coffee table. When she looked up, her voice was quiet. "We'll see, Henry. One day at a time." He nodded. No promises, just a beginning. A week later, on a cloudy Saturday, Henry invited them both to a quiet street in Queen Anne, just north of downtown. Sophie, perched on his shoulders, shrieked when she saw the "For Sale" sign. "Hen, did you buy a house?" He smiled up at her. "I bought a home, or at least I'm hoping it becomes one." Emma raised a brow, looking at the modest two-story craftsman with cautious curiosity. "It's not flashy," he said quickly, "but it's got room, a backyard, light in the mornings." He looked at her, a little nervous. "It's not just a house. It's a place. For us. When you're ready." Emma looked at the porch, then at Sophie, who was already planning where her fairy lights would go. Then she looked at Henry. And, for the first time since that long-ago goodbye, she smiled without hesitation. "We'll be back tomorrow." Rain came gently the next morning, tapping against the window panes like it was hesitant to disturb the peace. Inside the new home on a tree-lined street in Queen Anne, the scent of fresh paint mingled with cinnamon rolls Emma had insisted on baking, just to see how the oven worked. Sophie danced barefoot across the hardwood floor, twirling in the empty living room, her laughter echoing up the staircase like sunlight in motion. Henry stood near the open boxes in the hallway, hands on his hips, taking it all in. It wasn't just the furniture delivery or the echo of footsteps on clean floors. It was something subtler, something quieter. It was the feeling of belonging. Emma appeared from the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel, her sweater dusted lightly with flour. "Well," she said, her voice teasing but tinged with sincerity, "you weren't lying. It does get morning light." He smiled, motioning toward the wide window that overlooked the modest backyard where a swing set would soon go. "It's nothing like the penthouse," Henry said, glancing at her, "but it's right." Emma nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the space not for flaws, but for possibility. "Right," she echoed, as if testing the word against the walls. Sophie bounded toward them, gripping a sheet of drawing paper. "I made us a sign for the front door." Emma took it gently. In bold, crooked letters surrounded by stick figures, flowers, and a giant sun, it read, "Home Sweet Home, the Mitchell-Carter Family." Henry's voice caught in his throat as he crouched down beside Sophie. "You're really something, kid," he murmured, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. She grinned. "I know." That afternoon, friends and neighbors stopped by to welcome them. Emma's co-worker from the bookstore brought a flowering plant. Henry's former CFO, David, dropped off a toolbox with a wink and said, "You'll need this more than balance sheets now." But the most surprising moment came when Claudia Hale appeared at the end of the driveway. Emma stiffened. Henry instinctively stepped in front of them, but Claudia raised both hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to make trouble," she said, her voice tired. I needed to say I'm sorry, to both of you." Henry studied her for a long moment. She looked smaller somehow, less sure. He gave a slow nod, not of forgiveness, but of closure. "Thank you for coming," Emma said quietly. Claudia's eyes flicked toward Sophie, who was braiding dandelions in the grass, then back to Emma. "She looks just like you," Claudia said softly. "The world could use more of that." She turned and left, leaving behind silence and a shared exhale. That night, after the dishes were done and the last box was unpacked, Henry stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and soft. Emma joined him, holding 2 mugs of tea. They sat side by side on the steps, watching the porch light cast golden halos in the fog. "You know," Emma said gently, "I used to imagine what this would have been like, the 3 of us, laughing in a kitchen, fighting over cabinet space, arguing about bedtime." Henry glanced at her. "And now?" She smiled wistfully. "Now I just live it." He reached for her hand, not expecting her to take it, but she did. Fingers intertwined. No more walls, no more some days. Just now. Sophie cracked open the front door a minute later, still in pajamas, her stuffed penguin tucked under her arm. "Can I stay up a little longer?" she asked, her voice sleepy. Emma was about to answer, but Henry beat her to it. "Only if you sit with us." Sophie padded over and curled into Henry's lap, her head resting on his chest like it had always belonged there. They sat like that for a long while. A family not born of perfection, but of effort and forgiveness. A family not shaped by clean starts, but by earned second chances. Henry looked down at Sophie, then at Emma, then out into the Seattle night. The empire he once built had towers, but here, on this porch, in this house with these 2 people, he'd finally built something that mattered. Something he'd never trade. A home. A future. A family.